What is up, everybody? Hope everyone's having a really highly successful day today. Hope everyone's being safe, staying healthy, all of the above. Very value-packed episode for you here on day 17 of the All About How podcast and our 365-day podcasting experiment from growingau.com. You know the mantra, you know the motto, you know the mission. My name is John Knott, your host. Really glad you're tuning in today. Really glad to have you here listening. What's up? Hope you're having a great day. Let's go ahead and roll that intro and jump into a super value-packed episode. This is day 16 of All About How. Let's get into it.
It's all about how in 2020 we're going to leave the world a better place than we found it. And have a very highly successful day.
So if you listened to yesterday's podcast, you know that we were talking about the ability to take this time, a lot of us are off, a lot of us are working from home, a lot of us are not as busy as we normally would be, and to take that time to really figure out what it is that we want to achieve in this lifetime, and also figure out how we want to get there, how we want to prioritize our life to make our dreams a reality, figuring out not necessarily how to do more, but how to do less better. And that was really the concept and the topic of our podcast yesterday. Well, I want to expand upon that slightly today in this episode of the podcast, and we're going to be talking about something called your Death Star moment and how to find your Death Star moment. And before we can even talk about finding that moment, we have to define what exactly a Death Star moment is. So a lot of us, and I'm sure if you haven't, you definitely need to go watch it, episode 4 of Star Wars, we know that in the end, and spoiler alert here, we have Luke Skywalker, he's flying, and he's in the Death Star flying around, and next thing we know, he's being chased by the TIE fighters, and he's coming up on the place where he needs to drop the bombs, and he drops them in there, and then next thing you know, the entire Death Star blows up, right? And this is what I would consider to be a Death Star moment. It was this moment that Luke Skywalker, in this case, was meant to achieve. This was something that he had to do. Very important. He was preparing for it. He was training for it through the course of the movie. The events that happened led up to that ultimate fight and that ultimate engagement. So those were a very key moment, an integral moment in his life, something that he, even maybe unknowingly, was preparing for a very long time. Obviously, on Tatooine, he wasn't necessarily aware that he was preparing for it, but everything in his life culminated at that moment, and that was really something that was important for him to live for and important for him to accomplish, right? So how does the Death Star moment apply to real life? Well, it's this thing that we are meant to accomplish, this big moment where the rest of our life will be defined by us accomplishing this task. Will be defined by this moment. This is a key, integral part of our existence. And I believe that finding a Death Star moment in everyone's life is something that is not like a recommendation. It's not like a maybe do it. I do believe it's an essential thing to live and feeling that you have lived a fulfilled life. So how does this mean here? Obviously, it can be argued if Luke Skywalker wasn't a Jedi and didn't have to, fulfill his destiny and all this type of stuff, that he could have done what he did and then live the rest of his life and knowing that he had accomplished something incredible and that he had done a lot for the people around him and the people that he cared for and himself as well. So if we step back and apply that to real life, we all have these goals, these dreams, these aspirations that I would consider to be Death Star moments. These things that, at night when we can let our guard down, we think about wanting to do them. And hopefully it's, positive things, right? Legal positive things. But these things that we want to do, these defining moments of our life, these Death Star moments. And I feel that a lot of us don't necessarily go about achieving those Death Star moments for one reason or another. We can sit here all day and talk about the plethora of reasons that would cause someone to not pursue their Death Star moment. But I think in reality, we can just take a step back and realize that, okay, we all have reasons for not doing it. But what does not doing it harm us? How does it harm us? And if we think about this, I feel like a lot of us, and myself included in certain aspects, sometimes feel that, what's the point? That whole conversation of the meaninglessness of life sometimes and all that kind of, that really nihilistic ideologies. But I think it's something that everyone contends with. So how do we use those ideologies and move past those and actually feel that we are living a fulfilled life? you ask the question of the purpose of life and all that kind of stuff. That's really subjective. People will give you religious answers. People will give you scientific answers. And I think that doesn't really matter, right? But what matters is for us, how and what can we do to feel fulfilled in our life? And I believe not only achieving the Death Star moment, but understanding what our Death Star moment is, planning, doing the preparation to achieve it, and finally achieving that Death Star moment leads to a lot of feeling of fulfillment in one person's life. I think if we look around at several different people, we can see this all across history, right? So like you look at someone like Gary Vee. I'm sure if you listen to me, you might know him. He started VaynerMedia. You can say that was his Death Star moment. You look at people like Scott Kelly, the astronaut, him going into space was his Death Star moment. Look at someone like Neil Armstrong walking on the moon was his Death Star moment. You look at somebody like, for example, Martin Luther King, his "I Have a Dream" speech. I think a lot of people would say was his Death Star moment. You look at someone like Abraham Lincoln. I think his helping the country get through Civil War, the Gettysburg Address, all these major things that he did, those were his Death Star moments, right? These were the things that he was living for, that he was born to do, and these high things that he accomplished to actually say that his life had purpose and his life had meaning. So I think we've seen it plenty of times throughout, and you can take your favorite person and pick what was their Death Star moment, because most people who we know about had that moment. And I think what it takes now is being able to understand and notice that moment in our own lives and figuring out how it is we achieve it. Because here's what I worry about when someone doesn't necessarily try to achieve that moment. And what scares me about that is I feel like it leads to an idea and a feeling of pointlessness, if you will, in life. And I feel like that pointlessness could lead, and unfairly so, but regardless of that, it could lead to a feeling of resentment and a feeling of kind of blame, right? Being placed on those around you, saying, and kind of this idea of, taking the blame off yourself. Of, oh, I didn't achieve this because of this person or this event. But in the end, we do have to realize that if we don't achieve something, it's completely on us that we didn't achieve that thing. Despite, maybe the people around us, if they weren't supportive of it, they may have made it harder, but still it was our choice, right? And that's something that the book I'm reading right now, Essentialism, talks a lot about, is our choice. But anyway, I think what I worry about is if someone does not actively pursue their Death Star moment, their purpose, their personal legend, if you want to look at Paulo Coelho's Alchemist book, if they don't pursue those moments, then it's going to lead to I would imagine a lifetime of unfulfillment and resentment towards wherever it is we place the blame. And maybe that resentment is toward ourselves, and we take that resentment out on others, which is not fair to others, and it's not fair to ourselves, right? So we need to actively pursue these Death Star moments. And I'm not going to, this podcast isn't necessarily, the idea of helping you figure out what your Death Star moment is. I think that's going to take a lot of time and reflection, but ultimately I think it could also take very little time, because I think a lot of us know what that Death Star moment is. I have a buddy of mine that I would believe that his Death Star moment is to be on the presidential cabinet, right? So again, that's something that I feel like he needs to go and achieve in effort to fulfill his Death Star moment. But I feel like this podcast isn't necessarily so much how to find your Death Star moment as much of it as it is an inspiration to go out there and begin work on achieving it. Even if it's going to take you 7, 8, 10, 15, 20 years to actually end up achieving that, just knowing that you're making progress, I think is going to give life direction. It's going to give life meaning. It's going to give life purpose. For me, I want to talk a little bit about what I know and have come to determine my Death Star moment to be, and something I'm going to make very clear on this podcast, so that, because I imagine this podcast is going to be sticking with me for a very significant portion of the next 5 to 10 years of my life. So I imagine that my Death Star moment, I will fulfill that within the course and longevity of this podcast. And that Death Star moment for me is I've been very enamored with and taken in by the idea of mountaineering probably for the last 2 to 3 years. Since I was about 17, I was really interested in this idea of high alpine climbing. And the one thing that I've always wanted to do is I wanted to, first, the kind of Death Star moment was I wanted to climb Mount Everest, which is something that I want to do that. That is going to happen in the length of this podcast, as you will hear the episode where that has been completed. But I've compounded on that Death Star moment. That is an individual Death Star moment in my life that needs to be achieved, but I also want to extend that to completing something called the 7 Summits Challenge, which is climbing the highest mountain on every single continent. So, for example, that's like Denali in North America and Alaska, Everest in Europe, Kilimanjaro in Africa. That's Mont Blanc in Europe, depending on whose 7 Summits challenge you are following. But I like the company Mont Blanc, so I want to go climb Mont Blanc. So, just for conversational sake, there's technically speaking 5-ish different versions of the 7 Summits Challenge. The version that I want to do is the 1950s Explorer Hackett version, which obviously, as we said, includes Everest, Denali, Kilimanjaro, Mont Blanc, which is what makes this version slightly different, and then also Vinson, which is the highest mountain in Antarctica, Kozakuzo, that could be completely pronounced wrong, but that is the highest mountain in Australia, and then Aconcagua in Argentina, which is the highest point in South America. So those I want to do that. That is what I've considered to be my Death Star moment. And being 19 now, this is the first year where I've decided that I'm going to take active steps to accomplishing those goals. One of my goals is that not this June, but in June 2021, to go and climb Mount Rainier in Washington as my first real step in the mountaineering experiences and in that world, right? And so then hopefully within 10 years of that point, I will complete the 7 Summits Challenge. So that is something I look forward to doing. It's something I really do want to complete, and I've considered that to be my Death Star moment. So I need to take active steps throughout the course of my life over the next however many years, months, and days, because it comes down to the daily, to make active progression towards that goal. And what's cool about that is, okay, so that's my Death Star moment. That's what I want to do. But it also involves, like, okay, so I'm going to keep my fitness better, right? Because I have to do fitness stuff every single day. I'm going to go run 5Ks and half marathons and marathons training for this type of thing. I'm going to be in the gym training in that way. I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff that is, not necessarily directly related to climbing, but what is going to, help me in the long term building some of these base fitness levels. So it allows me to do and experience a whole bunch of different things. Also, not to mention the travel I'll get to do when completing this challenge. So I look forward to it, but I've noticed and I've kind of finally come to terms with this idea of the Death Star moment, and that this is something that I do need to complete, that this is my moment, that I need to do this to feel that fulfillment. And because I think, people ask, they might ask you, why are you doing what is you're doing? And you can explain to them what's my Death Star moment. They may not understand what that is. Feel free to turn them on to this podcast. But, for me, I've come to terms with, I guess I've questioned a lot of times, why do I want to climb? And I think there's the easy answer and it's kind of the sexy answer, if you will, of, I climbed. Why'd you climb that mountain? Because it was there, right? But I don't think it's so much that. I think that's an easy way to describe it to people, kind of the crass way to do it. But I like the idea of, it was a quote I read, and unfortunately right now I don't remember who wrote the quote, but the reason I want to climb, and the quote that I heard was, climbing the mountain, right, and overcoming the mountain, if you will, and summiting it is as much of a physical experience of climbing the mountain as much as it is a experience of overcoming oneself in the same way, right, and progressing and elevating, climbing over your internal struggles of dignity, as they describe it. And you're going to climb and overcome them, the challenges of the mountain, and at the same time you're going to climb and overcome the challenges that you face internally in yourself. So I like that idea. I think that really sums it up well for me. So that is my Death Star moment. I hope that you understand what it is I'm talking about, and I hope you understand the importance of pursuing this and understanding that it's going to, I believe, lead to a highly fulfilled life. And even if it takes you 10, 20, as we said, 30 years to achieve it, it's as much about the journey as it is the process. So I hope you found this useful, guys, today. I hope that you enjoyed this little episode here talking about our Death Star moment. Let me leave you with a quick fun fact of the day, as we always do. So today's daily fact, our little nugget of cool information for the day, is that 4 times as many people speak English as a second language than as their native language. It actually is the most widely spoken language in the world, with nearly 2 billion people learning it as a second language and only 350 million people speaking it natively. That, to me, is mind-blowing. Again, this is from goodhousekeeping.com. They have a lot of awesome little stuff I like to pull from and talk about. That's kind of cool. A lot. That's a lot of people right there, and that's considerably more than what speak it natively. So the more you know, right? Well, hey, I hope everyone really did enjoy this podcast. Hope you found it useful. Hope you have a very highly successful day. Leave the world a better place. This has been the All About How podcast with John Knott from growingau.com. Hope everyone has a awesome day, and we will talk to you tomorrow.